Welcome to another episode of Structo's Meet the Writers. This is a short form video series where we talk to the writers and poets contributing work to Structo 20. And today we're very happy to be joined by Daniel Bennett. Hi, Dan.
Hi.
So we've published you, I realized, a bunch over the years. And you have one poem in the new issue.
That's right.
And you've agreed to read that to kick us off.
Yeah. It's called The Idea of Texas. Mainly the sky, the rash of desert coral over dust, the erosion of islands without seas, a petrified forest unearthed in the gulch. He wanted to paint deserts, the stratification of rock, the shadow of a raptor across an airstream roof, the exhaustion of aircon and refrigerator units, a man shouting at traffic from a commuter bridge. In this, as in all things, he found himself drawn by a memory of scenes he had never experienced. He rented houses, passed through lives, existing as a peripatetic alien, the one with a fondness for blue ribbons and opiates. The idea of Texas drew him to abandon his home, but he fell into the shift between representations. He found himself remarking on the weather to strangers, but there had been no weather for as long as he lived here, apart from an electrical storm crackling across the desert, setting news of the border across highways and flyovers. And he knew he was doomed to be captured by longing, as though he had walked when no one had ever walked and still had many miles to go.
Thanks, Dan. So you're currently in London.
I am.
But you did live for a while in the States. You studied, I think.
I did. I studied at the University of Colorado at Boulder for a year. I was taught by the poet Edward Dorn and the filmmaker Stan Brakhage while I was there. So it was a great year intellectually.
And I was wondering whether because this poem is incredibly evocative of a place that I would imagine most people who read it have not been to. And I wonder if there was some link there with your time in the US.
There's very little link. I've never been to Texas.
Yeah.
I've been through some of the landscapes that are perhaps reminiscent of Texas through, Arizona, New Mexico, but Texas, no. And really, I think that's what the poem's about.
Yeah, exactly.
I think weirdly, what drove me to go to America was really this idea of America. And I didn't go back after I returned from America, I didn't go back to America again for something like 20 years.
Oh, wow.
I suppose there was a sort of confrontation between reality and ideal while I was there. Not that I had a terrible time. I really enjoyed the time. But I was driven by an idea of what America was, and it was, based on things I'd read, things I'd seen, things I'd heard, perhaps people I'd met, but representation. And I think that's where the poem derives from.
Because we all have these ideas, and it's nice to see them interrogated a little bit in this piece. I guess many of us have it subconsciously, but especially from the US through movies. I mean, especially movies and TV, I guess. But yeah, just the imagery and the ideas are just so saturated in our minds from quite an early age.
And I'm self-consciously playing with some of those images in the poem. I mean, there's a direct sort of reference to the Wim Wenders film Paris, Texas, man shouting from the flyover is a scene from Paris, Texas, and there's just this. It's a filmic sort of world that I'm presenting, really.
So it occurred to me just as I was doing a bit of prep for this that I think you're the poet we've published the most in Structo history. Yeah. So you're in. I'm in 13, 15, 17, and now 20, and you have two poems in one of those issues.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's clearly we clearly have a connection with your work there, which is really interesting.
It's really funny that you say that, because I gave up poetry for quite a while. I just lost my sense of what a poem was. Didn't really write it. I was reading it, but I just lost it, and fell back into a corner on where I'd been in my 20s, and just started writing fiction, writing novels. And I mean, my fiction has always been really quite at the edges, and so I, after I'd written my novel, after a few things had settled down, I decided to start writing poetry again, and I started sending them off. And Structo was the first place that actually accepted one of these pieces.
Oh, really?
And the thing that made me laugh about it was that I felt that I'd really sort of moved beyond being between things. You know, I was always, my writing was always like called slipstream.
Yeah.
Right. And then I looked at,
that's funny.
I looked at Structo when I saw the submissions policy for fiction was, we mainly like slipstream. So I thought, I'm never going to escape. I'm never going to escape being, not being able to be get categorized.
Well, that's super interesting, because I just brought up the page. So for those who don't know, all our back issues are for free online. So I'll put some links underneath the video to your poems. But the poem you have in issue 13 is Nomads, which is not a piece of even vaguely slipstream. None of your poetry that we've published is, I don't think. There's no. It's incredibly personal, very. I was about to say gentle, but that in the best possible way. It's very thoughtful, and it's been incredibly interesting, as I say, just to do a little bit of prep for this and just to see the range of writing you do. But you said that you stopped writing poetry for a while. I actually have a quote that I found on your blog, which I thought was really interesting here, which is maybe links these things. Back when I had definite ambition, I gave up poetry for a time and turned to fiction, writing a novel which ended up being based in the landscape of my birth. During a testing period of my life, my fiction began to fray at the edges. I turned to poetry again to make something out of those years, not so much to confess. I don't have much to confess, but to record. Is that still the way you think about poetry as opposed to fiction?
I think it is. I think my defining feeling about that shift between fiction to poetry is not, I mean, like I said, I'm not confessional, but I'm personal. That sort of impulse to record and have a direct link to time and place has become really important to me, particularly as the years advance. And I think that's probably where I felt I'd lost myself a bit with fiction, moving into characterization, and I'd either become I don't know. I think I really wanted to be able to preserve. I think that's really what it comes down to. And I think Nomads is a poem that does that. It's about the central image in that poem, which is it's still one of my favorite pieces I've written, actually, because it was early and it
was nice to revisit it.
Yeah. And as a few of the poems in those early issues of Structo are, they're sort of they're a bit loose. I think I'm a tighter poet now, a bit more scrupulous. But there's a sort of freedom to them that you feel. I feel looking back at them that it shows someone that is returning to a form.
It's fascinating to imagine that you're able to use these different forms for different purposes. But it's interesting that you say that you're kind of in between. I don't know if you'd say genre, but in between different types of writing in your fiction, especially because as I said before we started recording, I hadn't quite twigged how widely across how many genres you publish. I mean, you've had you've had stories in Black Static and Interzone, which are two of the biggest hitters in terms of genre fiction short stories that kind of have existed for a while and exist now. But I mean, your novels seem to be very much, well, what did you describe them as? You kind of not very, hard to characterize.
Hard to characterize, and with a bit of a taxonomy problem.
That's the one. Yeah.
I mean, I wrote a crime novel that is literary crime. It's not a sort of detective police procedural. I wrote another novel that I didn't think was crime that everyone else thought was crime. In fact, I got so much feedback about that novel from it was almost directly between the genres. So literary people felt it was too, literary agents, for example, felt it was too crime orientated, whereas crime people felt it was too flowery.
Yeah.
So,
a tricky one.
It is a tricky one. It lead to riches.
What were your reading habits in those kind of formative years when you were beginning to write? What were you reading at that period?
I was reading. I read a lot of science fiction. I always liked, imaginative works like that. I read a lot of Philip K. Dick during my 20s, which is probably the best time to read them. People like Vonnegut. I liked people, but then I sort of got into really niche crime novelists that were published sort of by Serpent's Tail, and Serpent's Tail at the time was a really great place for a lot of the things that I really enjoyed, because they sort of pitch things where that you'd get, Spanish literary fiction alongside crime fiction.
Right.
Juan Goiti Solo was published by Serpent's Tail, but also the Pepe Carvalho novels were published by Serpent's Tail. So there was and I liked odd things. I liked rare things. I liked, like American crime novelist Jerome Charin. Some of the books are awful. I mean, he's a great writer on occasion, but in terms of structure as crime novels, they're awful. But they're almost like dreams.
Yeah.
Crime tinged dreams like Blue Eyes and Marilyn the Wild, or Mark Bain, who wrote one of the Beatles films, and wrote Queen of the Night, which is just this really, really strange Second World War novel that just would not be published these days. not because it's obscene, although it borders on the obscene. It's too difficult to pin down. It's like Nabokov writing a war novel, and it so I remember quite vividly, just having this sense of what a novel was, but it wasn't what everyone else at the time, or probably now, thinks of as a novel. It's always been something that is rare and blurred, I think, my conception of what the novel might have been or is.
Yeah, that's kind of really intriguing to hear. We were talking briefly before about the Rolfo book that Structo Press put out. The other Rolfo book is put out by Serpent's Tail.
Or is it?
And it's a weird Spanish story about it would have been one of those, very dreamlike.
Yeah,
that's interesting. I wonder who the commissioning editor was during that period. I wonder if there was one person behind it all.
I think it was. I mean, it's funny. I used to live around the corner from Serpent's Tail when they were based in Highbury, in Blackstock. They're on Blackstock Mews. I was living on Blackstock Road. I always used to pass them by, longingly looking down the Mews at them. But they were a really interesting imprint at the time, and they've moved on into doing different things and still doing good things. But there was just a time when they were sort of a real touchstone for me.
And you caught them at the right moment.
Yeah.
So what are you working on now? Have you been able to be creative during this period?
I've done quite a lot. I've you mentioned some of the fiction I've written. I always wanted to write a collection of science fiction short stories. So I've done that. Baker's Dozen. I imagine, I'd dream of it coming out with as lurid as a science fiction cover as possible. You know, something with.
Yeah. No, yeah.
I'd love that. But you know, so a few of those stories are coming out through Interzone. And I've put together another collection of poems. I had my first collection published last year. So I've got that on the cards, starting to send that out, and just a lot of stuff. Just a lot of stuff.
So yeah, that seems like a really, really nice point to leave it. So thanks very much for taking the time. It's nice to catch up, and
it's great. It's great to see you.
Yeah,
it's always great to be in Structo.
It's wonderful to have you. So thanks, Dan.